The night Dean Martin dragged a man through Las Vegas. A drunk director slapped Marilyn Monroe. Dean Martin tied him to a bumper and made sure he felt every inch of asphalt. The backlot behind the Sands Hotel on the evening of June 3rd, 1959, was a kind of place that smelled like hot cable and concrete and cigarette smoke. Arc lights blazed down on 43 crew members doing their jobs in the Nevada heat. Camera operators, gaffers, sound technicians, production assistants who were new enough to the business to still believe that everyone in it had earned their place. Marilyn Monroe was there for a screen test, not her own. She was the biggest star in the world. She didn't need screen tests. She was there because the production needed a proper professional presence, an anchor, to give weight to some footage they were cutting for a studio presentation. Her agent had arranged it. It was supposed to be 2 hours. Arrive, hit your mark, say the lines, leave. The simplest kind of work. The director of the session was a man named Roland Fitch. Roland Fitch had directed 4 pictures in the early 50s, all of them modestly successful, none of them remarkable. He had spent the decade since then convincing himself and anyone who would listen that he was a misunderstood genius, that the industry had failed to recognize what he was, that the reason his phone had stopped ringing with good offers was politics and envy rather than the simpler truth that he was a man of average gifts with a severe alcohol problem and a reputation for making sets miserable. By the time he arrived at the Sands backlot that evening, Roland Fitch had been drinking since 10 in the morning. He was in his early 50s, heavy set, with a permanent red flush of a man whose liver had been fighting a losing battle for years. His shirt was already damp through the shoulders when he arrived. His tie was pulled loose. His eyes had that quality that people who worked around serious drinkers recognize immediately, not unfocused, but recalibrated, operating on different tolerances. A man convinced he was in command of himself when in fact he was operating on borrowed time and borrowed coherence. The session began at 6 in the evening. Marilyn was a professional in the truest sense of that word. She arrived on time. She knew the material. She hit her marks with the precision of someone who had been doing this since she was 16 years old and had never once stopped studying the craft. She was, by every account of everyone present that night, remarkable. The camera operators exchanged looks between takes. Even the most jaded crew members found themselves watching the monitor rather than their equipment. Fitch watched too, but not the same way. He had been making comments from the beginning. Low, under-breath remarks to his assistant, then slightly louder, then loud enough for the crew to hear. He had opinions about Marilyn's timing, about her blocking, about the way she was interpreting the material. His opinions were delivered with the particular authority of a drunk man who has confused volume with expertise. Marilyn ignored him. She had been ignoring men like Roland Fitch her entire career. She knew the pattern, the escalation, the provocation, the searching for reaction. She gave him nothing. She kept her focus on the work, and she kept the crew focused with her, which was itself a kind of leadership. But Fitch needed a reaction. Men like Fitch always do. They stopped for a lighting adjustment at 7:30. The gaffer was repositioning a key light, which required a pause of approximately 4 minutes. Marilyn stood at her mark, talking quietly with the camera operator about an angle they discussed trying. She had a specific technical thought about a detail in the blocking. She was calm, engaged, professional. Fitch walked onto the set. "You're doing it wrong," he said. Marilyn turned. She looked at him without alarm. "Roland, we're just talking through. I've been watching you for 90 minutes, Fitch said. His voice had the scotch in it now. You could hear every drink in it. "And what I'm watching is a woman who thinks being famous is the same as being good. It's not the same thing. You've never been good. You've been lucky and you've been pretty, and some of that is still hanging around, and you've been coasting on it." The backlit went very quiet. "You want to take a break?" Marilyn said. Not a question. Measured. Calm. The kind of calm that takes years to develop. "I don't want to take a break," Fitch said. "I want to finish this session with something usable, which means I need you to actually act instead of..." "Roland." Her voice was firm now. "Step off the set." What he did next happened fast. He raised his right hand, and he slapped Marilyn Monroe across the face. Hard, open palm. The sound of it cut across the backlit like a single sharp gunshot and reached every corner of the space before anyone had time to process what they were seeing. It was not ambiguous. It was not an accident. It was not a man who had stumbled or lost his balance or misjudged a gesture. Roland Fitch raised his hand, and he struck Marilyn Monroe across the face with full deliberate force. She stumbled, one step back. Her heel caught on a cable that was running across the floor, and she went down. First to one knee, catching herself on one palm against the concrete, her hair falling across her face. A sound went through the crew that wasn't a word and wasn't a scream. Something more primitive than either. Marilyn looked up from the floor. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked up at Roland Fitch with an expression that people who were there that night spent years trying to describe afterward. It wasn't fear. It wasn't rage. Exactly. It was something more total than rage. It was the look of a woman who has been told her whole life that this is what she deserves, and who in this particular moment, in front of 43 witnesses, was refusing, absolutely and finally refusing, to believe it. Nobody on that crew moved for 3 full seconds. Then everybody moved at once. The gaffer nearest to Marilyn went to her. Her assistant came from the side. 2 camera operators moved toward Fitch, who was standing in the middle of the set with his arms still slightly raised, his expression caught between arrogance and the dawning comprehension that he had just done something in front of 43 witnesses that could not be undone. "Get up," he said. His voice had gone flat. The drunk bravado was still there, but something had gone out of it, something that sounded almost like the first tremor of fear. "We're not finished." Nobody was listening to Fitch. They were all listening to the sound of the backlit side door opening. Dean Martin had not been scheduled to be anywhere near the Sands backlit that night. He had come to drop off documents, a contract revision for a production deal he was working on separately, something that needed to be in the production office before the weekend. He had driven himself. No driver, no entourage, just Dean in a charcoal suit behind the wheel of his cream-colored Cadillac, radio running low. Thinking about the drive home, he came through the side entrance and stopped. He saw Marilyn being helped up from the floor. He saw the blood at the corner of her mouth, a thin, bright line where her lip had split against her tooth. He saw her dress torn slightly at the sleeve and fall. He saw 43 people in various states of motion and paralysis. He saw Roland Fitch standing in the center of the set, with his arms still not quite lowered. The people nearest to Dean described what happened to his face in that moment with consistency that is remarkable given how many different people described it across how many different years. They all use versions of the same phrase. Something closed. Something that had been warm closed. And what replaced it was not hot anger. Not the kind that shakes or shouts, but something colder and more total. A decision. Dean crossed the backlit. He didn't run. He walked. But his walk had a quality to it that people stepped out of without being asked. The way people step out of the path of something moving with too much purpose to be redirected. He reached Marilyn. He crouched down next to her. He put one hand on her arm, steadying. "You all right?" His voice was completely level. "Dean, are you hurt?" She held his eyes for a moment. Her jaw was set. "I'm standing," she said. "Good." He passed her gently to her assistant. He spoke without looking away from Fitch. "Get her inside. Ice for her lip. Don't let her leave until I come find her." Then he straightened up and looked at Roland Fitch. He didn't speak immediately. He looked at Fitch the way a man looks at a problem. He is working through the mathematics of. Fitch looked back. In the drunk man's brain, something was miscalculating. He saw Dean Martin. He registered the name. He understood in some abstract way that this was a complication, but the scotch was insulating him from the full weight of what was happening. "I don't know what you think you saw," Fitch started, "but this is a closed production, and you don't have—" "I saw what I saw," Dean said. "This is between me and the production. You're not." "I'm going to give you one chance," Dean said. His voice was quiet enough that the crew strained to hear it, and because of that it carried further than shouting would have. "One, you apologize to Marilyn. Right now. You apologize to this crew. You put down whatever you're holding, you walk off this backlit, and you go back to wherever you came from. That's the one chance." Fitch stared at him. The Scotch was making calculations. Fitch was a made man in his own mind. A director, an authority, a man with credits and standing and a history in this industry that predated Dean Martin's movie career by a decade. He was not going to be told what to do. "Go to hell, Martin," he said, "and get off my set." Dean nodded, one slow nod, like a man confirming something he'd already known. "All right," Dean said. He turned and walked out of the backlit. For just a moment, Fitch thought he had won. That moment lasted at approximately 45 seconds. That was how long it took Dean Martin to walk to the parking area, open the trunk of Fitch's rented car, a beige Buick Special, the most anonymous vehicle on the lot, and pull out the length of rigging rope the location scout had left coiled there 3 days earlier. That was how long it took him to test its weight in his hands, find it adequate, and walk back through the side door of the backlit. He came back to the door with the rope over one shoulder. "What is that?" Fitch said. It was not quite a question. "You didn't take the one chance," Dean said. "So now we do it this way." What happened next? The people who were there have described in detail across 60 years of interviews and conversations and late-night stories told in bars and on sets and at kitchen tables. The details are consistent. There are 43 witnesses, and they mostly agree. Dean Martin tied Roland Fitch's ankles together with the rigging rope, not his wrists, his ankles. He crouched down and did it while Fitch shouted and struggled, and he did it with the calm of a man who has decided something and is now simply executing the decision. Fitch threw a punch. Dean ducked it without apparent urgency, the way a man ducks a branch on a walk he's taken many times. And when Fitch overbalanced and went down, Dean finished tying the rope with 3 loops and a knot that a former merchant sailor in the crew named Carl Du Bois later described as cleaner than anything he'd learned at sea. He tied the other end of the rope to the tow hook on the back of his cream Cadillac. The knot at Fitch's ankles was fixed. The rope between the hook and the ankles was 12 feet long. Dean got into the driver's seat. He started the engine. The sound of the Cadillac's engine in that concrete backlit was enormous. He pulled out of the backlit and onto the street. Roland Fitch was dragged. Not walked, not trotted alongside. Dragged. On his back, on the pavement, across the concrete surface of the road behind a cream Cadillac driven by Dean Martin, at a speed that was exactly fast enough to make it impossible to get traction, to stand, to do anything except slide. Las Vegas in the summer of 1959, at 8 o'clock in the evening, was fully, comprehensively alive. The Strip was a river of neon light and moving cars and people in summer clothes carrying drinks from casino to casino, from show to show, from one spectacular excess to the next. The Flamingo was pink and gold to the south, the desert and glittered to the north. The Riviera signed through blue light across the sidewalk in front of it. There were tourists from 40 states on that sidewalk, and cab drivers and cocktail waitresses walking to their shifts, and pit bosses on cigarette breaks, and hustlers and honeymooners, and men who had come to Las Vegas to be someone different for a weekend. Every single one of them stopped when the cream Cadillac came out of the Sands Access Road and turned onto the Strip, because behind the cream Cadillac, attached to its tow hook by 12 feet of rigging rope tied around his ankles, was a man in a loosened tie and a damp shirt being dragged across the asphalt of Las Vegas Boulevard at 15 miles per hour. Fitch was shouting. He was trying to protect his head with his arms. He was being dragged across real asphalt, not slowly, not gently, not in a manner designed to preserve him. His jacket tore within the first 50 feet. His shirt after that. The pavement was doing what pavement does to things dragged across it. Cars stopped, not because they had to. Dean was driving in a straight line, not blocking anyone. They stopped because the driver saw what was behind the Cadillac, and they stopped because they were human beings, and human beings stop when they see something that rewrites their understanding of what is possible on an ordinary Tuesday evening. People on the sidewalk stopped. Then they didn't stop. They moved toward the curb, pressing forward. A crowd forming and growing, and the word moving through it fast and the car was moving. The word jumping from person to person way fire moves through dry grass. That's Roland Fitch. That's Dean Martin's car. Did you hear what Fitch did at the Sands? Dean drove for 6 blocks. 6 blocks down the Las Vegas Strip, one of the most observed, most photographed, most witnessed stretches of road in the United States of America, with Roland Fitch behind him on the asphalt. By the third block, the crowd lining the sidewalk was 3 and 4 people deep. By the fourth block, someone had run inside the Riviera and told the story to casino floor, and people were coming out casino to see. By the fifth block, a photographer for a Las Vegas newspaper had gotten his camera up. By the sixth block, every person on that stretch of the strip knew what Roland Fitch had done and what Roland Fitch was paying for it. Dean Martin turned the Cadillac around at the sixth block. He drove back the same way he had come. He drove back past the same crowd, which had not dispersed, had grown. In fact, the people who had missed the first pass pressing forward to see the return. He drove at the same speed. He made no attempt at concealment. He drove like a man completing a task he had assessed and committed to and had no second thoughts about. He turned back into the Sands access road and stopped the car. He got out. He walked around to the back of the Cadillac. He crouched down next to Roland Fitch, who was lying on the access road pavement, making sounds that were not quite words. Dean untied the rope from Fitch's ankles. He stood up. He looked down at Fitch for a moment. "In this city," Dean said, "in this industry, you don't put your hands on women. You don't put your hands on performers. You don't put your hands on crew. You don't put your hands on anyone who came to work and expected to be safe while they did it." He paused. "Now you know what happens when you do." He folded the rope. He handed it to one of the 4 Sands security men who had materialized in the access road. Nobody ever admitted to making the call that brought them there. "Make sure he gets a doctor," Dean said. "Then make sure he gets a cab." In that order. He straightened his jacket. He walked back inside the Sands. Marilyn Monroe was in a backstage dressing room when Dean found her. Her assistant had brought ice wrapped in a cloth. Her lip had stopped bleeding. She was sitting in a chair with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. And when Dean came through the door, she looked up at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Her assistant and the other stepped out without being asked. "What did you do?" Marilyn said. "What needed doing," Dean said. He sat down across from her. "Dean." Her voice had something in it that was close to alarm. "He's connected. He knows people. You know how this works. You know that what you just did will have consequences," Dean said. "Yes, I know. You could have just called Jack and Tratter. You could call Frank. You could have. I could have done a lot of things," Dean said. "What I couldn't do was watch a man hit you and make phone calls about it." She looked at him. There was something working in her eyes, something complicated and layered and difficult to read. Marilyn Monroe had been beautiful her entire adult life, and beauty does something to the way people look at you. It gets in the way. It creates a kind of interference. What Dean was doing in that moment was looking past it, and she knew the difference. She'd always known the difference. "You know what the worst part was?" she said quietly. "Not the hit. I've been hit before. Men who were supposed to love me have hit me. The worst part was what I felt right before. That reflex, that instinct to apologize, to make it smaller, to say, 'I'm sorry, Roland. I'm sorry I made you do that.'" Dean didn't say anything. 20 years, she said. 20 years of the industry telling you that you're lucky to be here, that you should be grateful, that you don't make demands, you don't have opinions. You show up and you look the way they need you to look, and you're grateful for every second of it. It trains you. It builds something in you that starts apologizing before the blow even lands. "Did you apologize?" Dean asked. She met his eyes. No, he agreed. "You didn't." Something shifted in her face. Small, almost invisible. "But there." "Dean," she said. "Yeah, thank you." He nodded. No performance in it. No effort. Just the nod of a man who has done what needed to be done and considers the accounting settled. The story left the Sand that night and moved through Las Vegas the way only certain stories move. Not gradually, not in the normal sequence of rumor and verification and elaboration, but all at once, arriving in every room at approximately the same moment the way a wave arrives at a shore. By 9 o'clock, it had reached the casino floors of 3 hotels. By 10 o'clock, it had reached the backstage of every show on the Strip. By midnight, it had reached the poker rooms and the private dining rooms and the back offices where men conducted business that did not appear in any ledger. Frank Sinatra heard it from a bellhop at 9:15. He was between sets in the Copa room, standing in the wings with a cigarette. He said only, "Good." Then he went back out and finished his set. The story reached Hollywood by the following morning. It arrived in the form that all true stories arrive. Fragmentary, disputed at the margins, exaggerated in some details and compressed in others, but correct in its essential architecture. Dean Martin had tied Roland Fitch to his car and dragged him down the Las Vegas Strip because Roland Fitch had slapped Marilyn Monroe on a Sands Hotel production set. People verified it. 43 witnesses from the backlot, an uncountable number of witnesses from the Strip itself. The photographer had gotten his picture. The picture ran in a Las Vegas paper, though the editors, after a series of very direct phone calls from very specific people, chose a version of the image that was technically accurate, but strategically incomplete. The verification did not take long. The facts were solid. What happened next, in the days and weeks that followed, was quieter but more total. Roland Fitch's 2 projects in active development went dark. Not dramatically. No announcements, no press releases, no public cancellations. They simply went quiet. Calls that had been returned within hours began taking days. Then they stopped being returned at all. A studio executive who had been considering Fitch for a prestige assignment quietly made other arrangements, and when asked about it said only that the project had gone in a different direction. The industry moved around Roland Fitch the way water moves around obstruction, without announcement, without ceremony, with the absolute efficiency of a system that has identified something as more trouble than it is worth and has simply rerouted. Within a year, Fitch was directing industrial training films in Burbank. Within 2 years, he was not directing anything. He made no legal complaint about what had happened on the Strip. His attorney, when consulted, explained the situation with great patience and great specificity. The complaint would require Roland Fitch to explain, in a courtroom, in front of a judge, in detail, the sequence of events that had led to his being tied to a bumper. It would require him to establish, as the foundation of his complaint, that he had struck Marilyn Monroe across the face on production set in front of 43 witnesses, and that Dean Martin's response to this had been disproportionate. His attorney explained that this was not a case he could win. His attorney explained this several times, with increasing patience, until Fitch understood. He did not file a complaint. The ripple that went through the industry after that night was not loud. The industries that operate on reputation never make loud corrections. Loud corrections draw attention to the thing being corrected, and drawing attention to it raises questions about why it needed correcting in the first place. What the industry made instead was a quiet correction, a recalibration. The directors who have been operating on the assumption that a set was a space where they could do whatever they wanted to whoever was on it, and that performers, particularly women who depended on the industry's goodwill to work, would absorb whatever was directed at them and continue working. Those directors did a private accounting. Nobody announced it. Nobody described it. But the accounting happened. You could measure it in the absence of certain incidents, in the silence where the incidents had been, because the question that lived in that silence was simple and it was unanswerable in any way that favored them. If Dean Martin was willing to tie Roland Fitch to a bumper and drag him down the Las Vegas Strip in front of 1,000 witnesses, if Dean Martin was willing to do that publicly, clearly, with no attempt at concealment and no apparent concern for consequences, then what else might Dean Martin do? And who else might follow his lead? And how many people on how many sets were watching and waiting, and now knew that there was a version of events in which this did not have to be tolerated? That was the real consequence of that night. Not Fitch's career, not the photograph, not the story that ran in 3 newspapers and was whispered about in 100 production offices. The real consequence was a question that now lived in rooms where it had not lived before. There's one piece of this story that is rarely told. 3 days after the incident, a young production assistant named Marie Solis came to see Dean Martin. She was 22 years old. She had been on the backlot that night. She had been the one running the slate for the session. She had seen everything. She had been one of the 43. She came to the Sands and she asked at the front desk, and they let her through because Dean had left word. She found him in one of the back meeting rooms, going through production paperwork. She told him she wanted to say something. He put down the paperwork and listened. She told him that she had been working in the industry for 3 years, that in those 3 years she had seen things on sets, not as severe as what had happened to Marilyn, but in the same direction, and that she had always believed that the correct response was to absorb it and continue working, because the alternative was to be the kind of person who made trouble, and the kind of person who made trouble did not work. She told him that watching what he had done had changed something in her understanding of what was possible, not in a dramatic way, not in a way she could easily put words to, but something had shifted in her sense of what the world was and what it could be, and she wanted him to know that, and she wanted to say thank you. Dean Martin listened to all of it. When she was done, he said, "You didn't cause the trouble. The trouble was already there. What you do with what you saw, that's yours to decide." Marie. Solis worked in the film industry for 31 more years. She became a production manager, then a producer. She was known by everyone who worked with her for running sets where people were treated with a specific and non-negotiable baseline of decency. When asked about it in an interview in 1987, she said it came from a night in 1959 when she saw one man decide that what was happening in front of him was his business. He didn't have to make it his business, she said. That's what I've never forgotten. He didn't have to be there. He didn't have to see it. He came through a door at the wrong moment and the right moment at the same time, and he decided that what he'd seen changed what he was responsible for. Most people don't make that decision. They tell themselves it's not their problem. They keep walking. He didn't keep walking. June 3rd, 1959. The night Roland Fitch raised his hand to Marilyn Monroe in front of 43 witnesses and convinced himself that nothing would come of it. The night a man in a charcoal suit came through a side door and made a different decision. People who were there that night, on the backlot on the strip, at the curb watching a cream Cadillac pass at 15 miles per hour, will tell you the same thing if you ask them across any number of years. They will tell you what they remember most clearly is not the rope, and not the car, and not the sound of asphalt doing what asphalt does. What they remember is the moment before. The moment when Dean Martin walked into that backlot and saw Marilyn Monroe on the floor and crouched down beside her and said, in a voice that was completely level, that had nothing performative in it, that was simply the voice of a man asking a question he needed answered. 2 words. "You all right?" Because that was where it started. The bumper and the strip and the 6 blocks were the ending. The beginning was a man who came through a door and saw something that was wrong and made a choice that most people talk themselves out of making inside 30 seconds of arriving at it. He did not talk himself out of it. Roland Fitch thought he could slap Marilyn Monroe across the face on a production set in Las Vegas and walk away unchanged. He was wrong. He walked away. Or rather, he was dragged away across 6 blocks of the most visible street in America, and the man he was when that ride was over was a permanently smaller version of the man he had been when it started. That is what the night cost him. Not just a career, not just a reputation. Something more personal and more permanent than either. His absolute certainty that men like him could do what they wanted people like Marilyn Monroe without consequence. That certainty died on the asphalt of the Las Vegas Strip in the summer of 1959, and nothing that came after it ever brought it back. Dean Martin was asked about that night many times over the years. He answered the question the same way every time, in various forms of the same few words, with no elaboration and no apparent need for any. He said, "I saw what happened. I did what made sense." That was the whole of it for him. No mythology, no self-congratulation, no lengthy accounting of the moral calculus. He saw what happened, and he did what made sense, and he had no difficulty at all living with either half of that sentence. That is, in the end, the rarest thing. Not the courage to act, not the willingness to accept consequences. The genuine belief, not performed, not constructed, not maintained through effort, that when you see something wrong being done to another person, acting on it is simply what makes sense. Some men have to be convinced of that. Some men have to be persuaded, pressured, argued into it, shown the moral architecture of it piece by piece until they arrive at the conclusion. Dean Martin already knew. He had always known. And on a June night in 1959, when Roland Fitch raised his hand to Marilyn Monroe in front of 43 witnesses and then made the mistake of being present when Dean Martin came to a side door. The knowing finally had somewhere to go. 6 blocks down the Las Vegas Strip, 15 miles per hour, every inch of it earned. Story